Hello, my friends, and welcome to Night Whisper. This is a quiet place where we drift together into unanswered skies, slowly, calmly, and without fear. Here, we don't rush toward conclusions. We listen, we observe, and we let the mystery breathe. If these stories bring you a sense of calm or keep you company through the night, you're always welcome to stay with us. Subscribing gently helps this space grow, and it allows more quiet minds to find their way here. You can also leave a soft, like if the story helps you relax, unwind, or feel less alone beneath the night sky. And if any thoughts rise as you listen, you're welcome to share them in the comments below, and just out of quiet curiosity. Where are you listening from tonight? I love seeing how far these whispers travel through the dark. Chapter 1. The night the sky didn't stay quiet. There are nights that pass without leaving a mark. And then there are nights that stay with you forever. Not because they were loud or dramatic, but because they quietly asked a question you can never quite stop hearing. This night began like any other. High above the sleeping world, a cargo plane moved steadily through the dark. No passengers, no conversations drifting down the aisle. Just metal, motion, and the low, comforting hum of engines doing exactly what they were designed to do. Inside the cockpit, soft instrument lights glowed like stars brought indoors. Gauges were steady. Numbers behaved themselves. Everything made sense. Captain Kenju Terauchi sat comfortably in his seat, his posture relaxed in the way only experience allows. More than 10,000 hours in the air had taught him something simple and powerful. The sky usually follows rules, and when it doesn't, there's almost always an explanation, waiting patiently to be found. Outside the windows, Alaska stretched endlessly below. Frozen rivers traced faint silver lines through darkness. Snow-covered land reflected, just enough starlight to remind you the earth was still there, quietly turning beneath the aircraft. The sky above was unusually clear. No clouds, no storms, no distractions. It was the kind of night pilots appreciate. Predictable, calm, almost meditative. Have you ever noticed how routine can feel like safety? That's what this flight felt like. A long, uneventful crossing on a familiar route. Time passed gently. Minutes blended together. The mind wandered, 10 returned, then wandered again. And in that calm, something subtle shifted. Captain Terauchi noticed a faint light. Not sudden, not alarming, just present. It hovered below the aircraft, slightly off to the left. Small, bright, easy to dismiss. Pilots see countless lights in the sky-distant aircraft, reflections, even stars that seem closer than they really are. So he didn't react. He simply watched. The light remained. Then another appeared beside it. 2 points of brightness, steady and clear, moving slowly against the backdrop of stars. Still, nothing felt urgent. His training whispered patience. Observation before interpretation. But then the lights began to move. Not drifting the way stars appear to drift. Not blinking like aircraft navigation lights. They moved with purpose. Smoothly. Quietly. As if guided by an intention rather than momentum. Captain Terauchi leaned forward slightly, narrowing his focus. The co-pilot glanced up as well. No alarm sounded. No warnings flashed. The aircraft itself seemed unconcerned, yet something in the movement felt deliberate. The lights grew brighter as they approached, their glow soft but distinct. They pulsed gently, not flashing on and off, but breathing, brightening, and dimming in a slow, steady rhythm. Have you ever watched a lighthouse from far away and felt drawn to it, even when you could not explain why? This felt like that. As the lights closed the distance, their glow reflected faintly on the cockpit glass. The interior took on a subtle shimmer, barely noticeable at first. It was easy to wonder if the mind was filling in details that weren't really there. But then Captain Terauchi felt warmth. Not intense, not painful. Just a gentle heat brushing across his face, like standing near a window warmed by the sun. On a winter morning, he blinked. Heat didn't belong here. There was no sound, no vibration, no exhaust trail. The engines maintained their steady rhythm, oblivious to whatever was happening outside. For a brief moment, the night felt thinner, as if the space between inside and outside had grown fragile. 7 minutes passed. 7 long, quiet minutes, where the lights stayed close, pacing the aircraft with ease. They didn't rush ahead. They didn't fall behind. They simply stayed. Captain Terauchi's thoughts moved carefully, methodically. He searched for explanations. Reflections? Unlikely. Other aircraft, their movement didn't match. Atmospheric effects? Possible, but the warmth, the pacing, the rhythm of the light made that answer feel incomplete. Still, he remained calm. Professionals don't panic. They observe. The co-pilot watched too, his expression thoughtful rather than fearful. The flight engineer glanced between instruments and the dark sky, sensing that something unusual was unfolding, even if he couldn't fully define it yet. And then, just as quietly as they had arrived, the 2 lights disappeared. No fading. No retreat. One moment, they were there, glowing softly in the dark, and the next, they were simply gone. The cockpit dimmed again. The warmth vanished. The sky returned to its familiar stillness. For a heartbeat, it felt as though the night had taken a breath. Was that it? Had the moment passed? Captain Terauchi allowed himself a small exhale. Perhaps it had been nothing after all. The mind can do strange things in darkness, especially when the world below offers no familiar reference points. But before the sense of normality could fully settle, something else emerged. Ahead of the aircraft, where empty skies should have been, a shape slowly revealed itself. By moving forward, but by becoming noticeable as though the darkness had shifted around it. At first, it was difficult to tell where it began or ended. Then the outline grew clearer, broad, heavy, silent. Captain Terauchi stared, his thoughts momentarily suspended. His mind searched for familiar patterns, but found none. This shape did not resemble any aircraft he had seen. It lacked wings, as he understood them. It didn't appear aerodynamic, yet it held its position effortlessly. Later, he would compare it to a walnut rounded, with bulging sections and a wide, flattened brim. But in that moment, words felt inadequate. The object was vast, not larger than expected vast, not unusually big vast. It was the kind of vastness that makes scale meaningless, the kind that makes distance hard to judge, because your brain refuses to accept what your eyes are telling you. Silence filled the cockpit. No one spoke right away, not because of fear, but because the mind sometimes needs time to catch up with the senses. The object emitted a soft, controlled glow, not bright enough to illuminate the sky, but enough to outline its form. It didn't flicker. It didn't pulse. It simply existed, calm and steady. Captain Terauchi made a decision. He needed to test reality. The aircraft descended 4,000 feet. The object stayed with them. They turned, executing a smooth, deliberate circle in the sky. The object followed, matching the movement without delay or effort. It didn't swing wide. It didn't lag behind. It remained precisely where it had been, as if space itself bent around it. Time stretched. The flight continued southward, mile after mile passing beneath them. The object remained nearby, neither approaching nor retreating. It didn't threaten. It didn't communicate. It simply accompanied them. Captain Terauchi contacted air traffic control, his voice calm and professional. He described what he was seeing without embellishment, choosing clarity over speculation. Controllers listened carefully, scanning their systems. There were no other aircraft in the area, yet faint radar returns began to appear, brief, inconsistent blips near the flight's position. They weren't stable enough to confirm, but they were present enough to acknowledge. The night was no longer quiet. Eventually, after hundreds of miles, the object withdrew. It didn't rush away. It didn't vanish abruptly. It simply ceased to be there, leaving the sky once again empty and dark. The engines hummed on. Instruments glowed steadily. The aircraft continued its journey as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. When the plane touched down in Anchorage, the night felt heavier. Officials listened. Notes were taken. Calm questions were asked. The crew was examined and found clear-headed, rational, and grounded. Captain Terauchi later sketched what he had seen. Simple lines, structured forms, not imagination memory. And as the paperwork began, a quiet realization settled in. Whatever had shared the sky with them that night, it had done so without urgency, without hostility, without explanation. It had simply been there. And sometimes, the most unsettling thing isn't danger, but the calm presence of something you cannot name. As the crew stepped back into the ordinary world, carrying the weight of the extraordinary with them, one thought lingered softly, like an echo in the mind. If the sky can keep secrets so gently, how many others have already passed us by? The night, outside the cockpit, was dark again, but something had awakened, and it would not easily fall back asleep. Chapter 2. Lights that moved with purpose. The strange thing about unanswered moments is that they don't end. When the moment ends, they linger. They hover quietly in the mind, asking nothing, yet refusing to leave. After the first light appeared, after the second joined it, and after both had settled into their silent pacing beside the aircraft, something subtle changed inside the cockpit. Not fear, not panic, awareness. The kind that sharpens the senses without raising the heart rate. The kind that makes every sound clearer, every reflection more noticeable. Every second feels slightly longer than the last. Captain Terauchi didn't speak right away. He watched. The lights stayed where they were below the aircraft, slightly off to the left holding position. With an ease that felt unnatural, they didn't wobble. They didn't drift. They moved as if they were aware of the plane's speed, its altitude, its presence, almost like companions. Have you ever walked beside someone in silence, matching their pace without thinking about it? That's what this felt like, except the companions were lights in the sky, and no one knew why they were there. The co-pilot adjusted his seat slightly, angling his view. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing, trying to catch details without letting imagination take over. He'd flown thousands of hours himself. He knew reflections. He knew stars. He knew how easily the night could deceive. Yet these lights refused to behave like tricks. They pulsed gently, their glow soft and controlled. Not mechanical blinking. Not random flicker. The rhythm was steady, almost calming, like a slow heartbeat. Bright, then slightly dimmer. Then bright again. The aircraft continued forward, engines humming with steady confidence. Nothing on the instrument panel suggested a problem. No warnings. No fluctuations. It was as if the plane itself didn't notice the lights at all. But the humans did. Captain Terauchi's mind worked carefully, cycling through possibilities. He had been trained to identify aircraft by light patterns, approach, angles, and movement. These didn't match anything in his memory. Commercial planes don't pace each other silently. Military aircraft don't hover without sound. Natural phenomena don't usually move with intention. Still, he held back judgment. Experience teaches restraint. The lights drew a little closer. Not suddenly. Not aggressively, just enough that their presence felt more personal. Their glow reflected faintly across the cockpit glass, creating soft halos that shifted as the plane moved. The warmth returned, again not intense, just noticeable. A gentle brush against the skin, like standing near a fireplace, from across the room. It made no sense at this altitude, at this speed, in this silence. The flight engineer glanced up from his instruments, drawn by the subtle change in light. He noticed movement clusters of brightness shifting together, undulating slightly as if connected. "Do you see that?" someone asked quietly. There was no need to answer. They all saw it, just not in exactly the same way. And that difference mattered. Because human perception is a fragile thing, shaped by angle, expectation, and attention. The co-pilot saw star-like points, brilliant and steady, but struggled to define their shape. The engineer saw patterns, groups of light that seemed to ripple and move together, but could not confidently say what they were attached to. Captain Terauchi, seated in command, saw structure. He saw form. The light fell mounted rather than floating, positioned rather than scattered. They gave the impression of belonging to something solid, something intentional, even if the body itself remained elusive. 7 minutes passed like this. 7 minutes where the sky felt alive in a way it never had before. Time stretched, not because anything dramatic happened, but because the mind was busy reconciling contradiction. Calm instruments versus unfamiliar visuals. Training versus intuition, versus something that felt just outside of logic's reach. Captain Terauchi kept his voice steady. When he finally spoke, to air traffic control he described the light simply, without speculation. No mention of aliens, no dramatic language. Just location, movement, brightness. Controllers listened. They checked their screens. There was nothing scheduled near the flight. The lights remained. At one point, Captain Terauchi considered the possibility that the objects were observing the aircraft not out of threat, but out of curiosity. The thought felt strange, yet oddly fitting. The lights weren't behaving like pursuers. They weren't closing in. They weren't signaling. They were accompanying. Have you ever felt watched without feeling endangered? That quiet awareness returned. The pulsing lights continued their steady rhythm, as if time meant something different to them. The plane moved through the sky at hundreds of miles per hour, yet the distance between them never changed. The co-pilot glanced at the captain, searching his expression for cues. Terauchi's face remained calm, thoughtful. That calm spread, grounding the moment. Panic thrives on uncertainty, but here, uncertainty was being met with patience. Then slowly, the lights shifted position. They moved slightly forward, then back, testing space like swimmers, adjusting to a current. Their motion was smooth, effortless, unconcerned with inertia. No sonic boom, no turbulence, no disruption. Just movement. Captain Terauchi decided it was time to test the illusion. He adjusted the aircraft's altitude. The plane descended gently. The lights descended too. They didn't lag behind. They didn't overshoot. They followed with precision, maintaining their relative position as if tied to the aircraft by an invisible thread. That was the moment curiosity deepened into something heavier, because coincidence becomes harder to accept when behavior repeats. As the descent stabilized, the lights held steady again, their pulsing glow unchanged. The warmth faded slightly, then returned subtle and consistent. The cockpit felt smaller somehow, not physically, but emotionally. The outside world pressed closer, reminding the crew that they were not alone in the sky. And then, without warning, the lights vanished. No dramatic exit, no streaking away. They were simply gone. The space they had occupied felt strangely empty, like the sudden quiet after a familiar sound stops. For a moment, the crew wondered if their eyes had betrayed them, if the entire experience had been a shared misinterpretation. The instruments remained steady. The sky returned to stillness, yet no one relaxed, because something about the disappearance felt intentional, not accidental, as if the lights had finished what they came to do, whatever that was. The co-pilot exhaled softly, tension releasing from his shoulders. The flight engineer returned his attention to the panels. Though his movements were slower now, more deliberate, Captain Terauchi remained still. He didn't look relieved. He looked expectant. And that instinct proved correct, because ahead of them, where darkness had reclaimed the sky, something vast was already waiting. Something that would make the quiet lights feel like an introduction rather than the main event. And as the aircraft moved forward into deeper darkness, the feeling returned not of danger, but of being gently guided toward a truth, not yet ready to reveal itself. Chapter 3. When the cockpit began to glow. The disappearance of the lights should have brought relief. That would have been the natural response. To feel tension drain away. To let the mind label the moment as finished, unexplained but over. Yet inside the cockpit, no one spoke. No one smiled. No one relaxed back into routine. Because sometimes, silence is not the end of something. Sometimes, It's a pause. The sky ahead looked empty again, vast and dark, just as it had before. Stars hung quietly in place, distant and indifferent. The frozen land below continued to slide past, unchanged. And yet, the air inside the cockpit felt different. Captain Terauchi kept his eyes forward, his hands steady on the controls. Experience had taught him to trust patterns, and this night had already broken several. Something in him sensed that what had just happened was not a conclusion but a transition. Have you ever felt that moment in a story, just before something important is revealed, that subtle tightening when the world seems to hold its breath? That was this moment. The aircraft moved on, cutting through the stillness, engines humming softly like a lullaby meant to calm restless thoughts. For a few seconds, maybe longer, nothing happened. Then the light returned. Not from the side this time, from ahead. At first, it was barely noticeable, a faint glow, almost like a smudge against the darkness, too soft to define. It didn't move toward the aircraft. It didn't flash or pulse. It simply existed. Captain Terauchi leaned forward, his attention narrowing. The glow slowly became clearer, revealing edges where there shouldn't have been any. Not sharp edges, but boundaries. A shape forming not by motion, but by presence. The cockpit lights reflected faintly off the glass, and for a brief moment, it was hard to tell what was inside and what was outside. The line between the aircraft and the sky felt thinner than ever. Then the warmth returned, stronger this time. It spread gently across Terauchi's face, like sunlight filtered through clouds. Not hot, not uncomfortable, just undeniably real. He raised his hand slightly, as if to test whether the sensation was imagined. It wasn't. The co-pilot noticed it too, not the warmth itself, but the glow. The interior of the cockpit seemed softly illuminated, bathed in a pale, amber light that had no obvious source. Shadows shifted subtly, moving in ways that didn't align with the aircraft's own lighting. "Do you see that?" he asked quietly, his voice low and controlled. Captain Terauchi nodded. The glow was coming from outside. As their eyes adjusted, the shape ahead became clearer. It was enormous. Not revealed all at once, but gradually, like something emerging from fog. The outline suggested mass, real mass occupying space, in a way that stars and reflections never could. The object didn't rush forward. It didn't descend or climb. It held position calmly, as if it had always been there, and the aircraft had only just noticed. Captain Terauchi searched for familiar reference points. Wings, tail, engine pods, anything. But the shape resisted classification. It was rounded, heavy-looking, with protrusions that gave it an almost organic quality, yet nothing about it felt alive, in the way creatures are alive. Later, he would describe it as walnut-shaped, with a broad, flattened brim. But in that moment, it felt less like an object and more like a presence, quiet, solid, undeniable, and silent. No sound reached the cockpit. No vibration disturbed the airframe. The engines continued their steady hum, the only reminder that the aircraft was still moving forward through space. The flight engineer stared, his brow furrowed from his position. The details were harder to see. He noticed clusters of light along the object's surface patterns that seemed to ripple gently, like reflections on water, though there was nothing to reflect. The co-pilot focused on the instruments, then looked back outside, then back again. Everything read normal. Altitude steady. Speed constant. Systems green. Reality, according to the panels, was behaving perfectly. Reality, according to their eyes, was not. Captain Terauchi made a decision. He needed to test whether this was truly something external or some extraordinary illusion created by light, atmosphere, and expectation. He initiated a descent. The aircraft dropped smoothly, 4,000 feet. The motion gentle and controlled. The glow outside shifted with them. The object descended too, not a second later, not a moment behind. It matched the aircraft's movement as if the two were linked. The cockpit remained quiet. No one raised their voice, no one gasped. The calm professionalism of the crew held firm, even as the implications grew heavier. Captain Terauchi adjusted course, initiating a slow turn. The object followed, perfectly. Not overshooting, not lagging. It maintained its relative position with an ease that made conventional explanations feel increasingly strained. Have you ever tried to follow someone's exact movements, matching every step, every pause? It takes effort, attention, intent. Whatever this was, it did not struggle. The warmth remained constant now, a soft reminder of proximity. The glow filled the cockpit evenly, as though the night itself had leaned in closer to listen. Time felt strange. Seconds stretched. Minutes blurred. The mind, faced with something it cannot immediately categorize, slows down, absorbing detail after detail in quiet disbelief. Captain Terauchi contacted air traffic control again, his voice steady, measured. He described the large object ahead, careful with his words, avoiding speculation. He spoke of shape, position, movement. Controllers listened. Their voices carried a subtle shift, still professional, but more alert now. They scanned their radar screens. For a moment, nothing appeared. Then faintly something did. A brief return, a blip that appeared where the aircraft said the object should be. It lingered for a moment, then faded, then reappeared again, slightly displaced as if struggling to be held. Radar, like human perception, has limits. The object seemed to exist just beyond those limits, touching them briefly before slipping away. The aircraft continued southward, mile after mile, passing beneath them. The object stayed nearby, neither approaching nor retreating. It didn't block their path. It didn't signal or communicate. It simply accompanied them. There was no sense of threat. That, perhaps, was the strangest part. No alarms, no urgency, no fear. Just the quiet weight of something unknown sharing the same sky. Eventually, slowly, the glow began to fade. The warmth softened, then receded. The object's outline grew less distinct, blending back into the darkness from which it had emerged, not abruptly, gently, like a thought, drifting away before. You can hold on to it. And then it was gone. The sky returned to its familiar emptiness. Stars reclaimed their sharp points of light. The cockpit lighting returned to normal, harsh and artificial by comparison. For several seconds, no one spoke. The engines hummed on. Instruments glowed steadily. The aircraft continued its journey, unchanged by the encounter, at least mechanically. But the people inside were changed. Captain Terauchi sat quietly, his mind replaying the moment again and again. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his chest, that what they had just experienced would not be easily explained away. Not because it was frightening, but because it was calm, orderly, intentional. And as the aircraft moved farther away from the place where the sky had briefly revealed something more, a quiet understanding settled in the cockpit. Some encounters don't announce themselves with drama. They arrive gently, linger patiently, and leave you carrying questions instead of answers. And those questions, once they awaken it, have a way of following you long after the sky has gone quiet again. Chapter 4. The shape too large to name. After the glow faded, after the warmth withdrew, and after the sky returned to its familiar darkness, the cockpit felt strangely smaller. Not because the space had changed, but because the world outside had expanded. Captain Terauchi kept flying, his hands steady, his posture unchanged. Experience demanded continuity. The aircraft moved forward, engines humming softly, systems responding as they always had. Everything mechanical insisted that nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet inside the minds of the crew, something had shifted. Have you ever tried to return to sleep after a vivid dream, only to realize the dream has followed you into wakefuls? That's what this moment felt like. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It carried memory. The copilot glanced out into the darkness again, scanning the same stretch of sky where the glow had vanished. His eyes searched for movement, for reflection, for anything that might explain what they had seen. But the stars remained fixed, distant, indifferent. The flight engineer adjusted in his seat, his attention split between instruments and the window. He knew his role well: to monitor systems, to trust numbers, to rely on readings that didn't lie. But numbers had limits. Captain Terauchi's thoughts returned again and again to the shape. Not the light, not the warmth, the shape. He replayed it in his mind, slowly, carefully, as if examining a memory under gentle light. It hadn't been sleek. It hadn't been sharp. It didn't resemble any aircraft blueprint he had ever studied. It had mass, the kind of mass that occupies space unapologetically. He remembered how it seemed to reveal itself gradually, not by moving, but by allowing itself to be noticed, as if it had always been there, waiting for the right moment to step forward from the darkness. That realization unsettled him more than sudden movement ever could. Objects that rush can be tracked. Objects that reveal themselves suggest intention. The walnut-shaped description came later, when words were required. In the moment, it felt less like a shape and more like a presence, rounded, layered, complex. There were bulges along its surface, not symmetrical in a way human machines usually are, but balanced nonetheless. Balanced and deliberate. Captain Terauchi had flown fighter jets. He understood aerodynamics, propulsion, and the necessity of form following function. This object seemed unconcerned with such principles. It didn't cut through the air. It rested within it. The size troubled him most. Estimating distance and scale in the sky is notoriously difficult, especially at night. But something about this object made its enormity undeniable. It wasn't just bigger than the aircraft. It felt vast in a way that made comparison meaningless. It filled space without crowding it. The co-pilot finally spoke, his voice calm but thoughtful. It was very large. Captain Terauchi nodded. Yes, that was all that needed to be said. They shared a quiet understanding that what they had seen defied easy language. Sometimes, agreement doesn't come from detail but from shared silence. The flight engineer, still cautious, offered his perspective. He hadn't seen the full outline clearly. From his angle, the object appeared as clusters of light, shifting gently along a form he couldn't fully resolve. It moved smoothly, he said, not like anything breaking through air. That observation lingered. Movement without resistance, presence without effort. Captain Terauchi wondered briefly whether the object was even bound by the same physical rules. The thought passed without panic, settling instead into curiosity. The aircraft continued its journey southward, the miles slipping by unnoticed. Below, the frozen land of Alaska stretched endlessly, unchanged by the drama unfolding above it. Above, the sky remained silent, yet Captain Terauchi couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being observed. Not actively, not intrusively, just aware. Have you ever watched long after someone has left the room? That quiet awareness returned, subtle but persistent. He contacted air traffic control again, describing the size and shape as carefully as he could. He avoided metaphors, avoided speculation. He knew how words could shape reactions, how his early imagination could run ahead of facts. The controllers listened attentively. Their responses remained professional, but there was a noticeable shift in tone of seriousness that hadn't been there before. They asked questions. How large? How far away? Did it move when you maneuvered? Captain Terauchi answered calmly, truthfully. He explained the descent, the turn, the way the object had matched each change effortlessly. There was a pause on the line, then acknowledgement. No explanations, no dismissals, just careful listening. Radar systems continued to show inconsistent data. Brief returns that appeared and vanished, never staying long enough to be locked or tracked. To engineers, this suggested clutter. To those in the cockpit, it felt like something else entirely, like trying to hold on to a shadow. Captain Terauchi considered the possibility that the object's size was an illusion. Perhaps something smaller, closer than it appeared. But that explanation struggled against the object's behavior. Smaller objects don't maintain position with such precision across long distances, and illusions don't respond to maneuvers. The thought crossed his mind that the object might not be a vehicle, At all not in the way humans understand vehicles. Perhaps it wasn't traveling through the sky so much as occupying it. The idea felt strange, yet oddly fitting. Time passed gently, the encounter stretching across hundreds of miles. The object remained nearby, neither encroaching nor withdrawing, its presence steady and calm. There was no hostility. That fact stood out more clearly with each passing minute. If this were a threat, it showed no interest in intimidation. No aggressive maneuvers, no displays of power. It didn't block their path or force their hand. It simply accompanied them. The aircraft, for all its complexity, felt suddenly small, a fragile thing moving through an environment far larger and more layered than it had ever seemed before. Captain Terauchi felt no fear. What he felt was humility, the kind that comes when you realize the world may be broader than the boundaries you have been taught. Eventually, gradually, the object began to withdraw, not by accelerating away, but by becoming less distinct. Its outline softened. The glow dimmed. The shape blended back into the darkness until it could no longer be separated from the night itself. And then it was gone. Not gone like something fleeing, gone like something choosing to step back. The cockpit returned to its normal state. Artificial lights reclaimed dominance. The warmth faded entirely. The engines hummed on, unwavering. The co-pilot exhaled slowly, a sound he hadn't realized he'd been holding back. The flight engineer returned to his instruments, his movements careful, deliberate. Captain Terauchi sat quietly, absorbing what had happened. He knew, deep down, that the shape he had seen would never fit neatly into reports or diagrams. No sketch could fully capture scale. No description could fully convey presence. Some things resist being named, and perhaps that is their power. As the aircraft continued south, carrying its cargo through the night, Captain Terauchi understood something quietly profound. The sky had not offered answers. It had offered perspective. And once your perspective changes, the world never quite returns to its previous size. Far ahead, the darkness waited patient, silent, and still full of secrets yet to be revealed. Chapter 5. Following without chasing. The night stretched on, deep and unbroken, as if the sky itself had decided to pause in anticipation. The darkness was not empty. It was alive with subtle motion, the kind that doesn't shout, but insists you notice. Captain Terauchi sat quietly, hands steady on the controls, eyes alternating between the instruments and the endless black beyond the cockpit windows. Somewhere in that vast expanse, the impossible still lingered. After the massive shape had revealed itself and slowly faded, the quiet in the cockpit was not comfort. It was charged. Every instinct the crew had leaned forward, attentive. The aircraft continued its steady southward path, engines humming a no monotone, each vibration through the fuselage. Now a reminder that they were moving through space that felt subtly different, not hostile, not threatening, but undeniably alive. The co-pilot adjusted his seat, leaning forward to look through the glass, eyes wide but controlled. His attention swept over the star-pierced darkness, then back to the instruments. His mind tried to reconcile what he was seeing with what he understood of physics, aerodynamics, and the natural world. But the two refused to reconcile. Then it happened. A new movement appeared in the distant, subtle, almost imperceptible. A shima along the dark horizon, a gentle response to the plane's continued flight. It was the same object, or perhaps a part of it that had revealed itself moments ago, now repositioning, keeping pace with the aircraft. And there it was, again, that quiet inevitability that defied comprehension. The object was following, not chasing, not accelerating to catch up, not retreating to intimidate. It matched every shift, every adjustment, every minor maneuver with an ease that made human engineering feel quaint in comparison. Captain Terauchi decided to test it further. A slow descent. 4,000 feet. The aircraft dipped gently into thinner layers of atmosphere. The object adjusted its position, with the same imperceptible grace, maintaining distance, matching the flight path as if it were tethered not by cables or engines, But being tented, a turn followed, a 360-degree rotation through empty night. Every mile a lesson in futility for any rational explanation. No jet, no balloon, no known phenomenon could respond with such precision and yet maintain perfect composure. The co-pilot's eyes followed the movement, reflecting both fascination and incredulity. "Captain, it's keeping up," he murmured, almost to himself. "Yes," Terauchi whispered, barely audible. "Exactly. Effortless." The warmth that had appeared earlier returned, not a threat, but a gentle brush, a reminder of proximity. The cockpit felt intimate with the unknown, as though the outside had come closer to converse silently. No noise, no radiation alarms, no mechanical interference. The aircraft continued smoothly, systems unaltered. Yet everything had shifted. Perception had changed. It was in those long stretches of observation that the subtle truths became noticeable. Objects that follow without chasing, without urgency, reveal intention more clearly than objects that attack. Presence, in this context, was a message, not a message of words, but of awareness. A reminder that someone or something knew they were there, and it did not react with haste, with fear, or with hostility. It reacted with purpose. Have you ever walked beside someone who mirrored your steps so perfectly, silently, effortlessly, that it felt uncanny? That was the sky now. The object was beside them, matching their rhythm without being compelled. The flight engineer broke the quiet. Softly, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he was observing. "It doesn't behave like anything human or mechanical we know, but it's calm." Calm, that word echoed in the cockpit, in the dark, over frozen landscapes, amid instruments that continued their steady, unaffected readings. Calm was more unsettling than chaos, because calm requires choice. It implies intelligence, or at least intent beyond instinct. The aircraft continued forward, miles slipping by unnoticed. The crew maintained focus, not out of fear, but out of respect for what they could see and for what they could not. The object, massive and enigmatic, remained alongside, neither closing in nor drifting away, perfectly synchronized. For a brief moment, Terauchi allowed himself to imagine an ordinary explanation. Perhaps a weather anomaly, perhaps a mirage created by temperature inversion over ice, perhaps an undiscovered natural phenomenon. He considered these possibilities carefully, knowing that as a pilot, reason had to be applied first. And yet, none of the explanations fit. Not the timing, not the scale, not the deliberate precision with which the object moved, not the pulsing warmth on his face, not the way it seemed to hold its position as though the laws of physics were suggestions, not requirements. Time became malleable, minutes stretched, hours felt compressed, hundreds of miles passed under them. But inside the cockpit, everything slowed, as though the world outside had shifted into a different rhythm. The ordinary markers of distance, of speed, of scale day had all been rendered secondary to something larger, something profoundly unfamiliar. Communication was maintained with Anchorage air traffic control. Calm, measured voices, repeated questions, as controllers tried to confirm something that, on their radar, appeared inconsistently. Intermittent blips, faint and fleeting, hinted at the object's presence, yet could not capture the totality of what the crew witnessed with their own eyes. It was as if the universe had granted partial confirmation, teasing the line between belief and evidence. Terauchi realized then that the experience was no longer about observation alone. It was about endurance, about patience, about witnessing without needing to grasp fully, to describe completely, or to control. The co-pilot's hand rested on the console, almost unconsciously. Every instinct screamed curiosity. Every trained response whispered caution. The flight engineer's gaze alternated between outside and instruments, noting, carefully recording mentally, yet fully aware that no notebook could contain this moment. And still, the object followed, not pursuing, not responding to threat, simply aligning, mirroring, accompanying. Have you ever noticed that silence can speak louder than words? That presence, sustained and unspoken, can weigh more than 1,000 explanations. The aircraft descended once more, testing limits, adjusting altitude, varying speed slightly. Each adjustment met with identical responsiveness. The object matched them. Again, without hesitation. The sky had become a space of conversation without sound, a dialogue of motion and intention, subtle and patient. Eventually, the hours, or what felt like hours, continued with the same gentle rhythm. The object remained, its scale imposing, its behavior deliberate yet serene. Calmness prevailed over panic, precision over chaos, observation over conclusion, and in that moment, Terauchi understood something quietly profound. Encounters like this were not meant to terrify or provoke. They were meant to shift perception, to remind humans of the vastness of what they do not understand, to teach endurance, patience, and attention without the comfort of resolution. The cockpit, once a realm of familiarity, now held reverence, not for the machine, not for the skies, but for the unknown itself. And as Alaska passed below, frozen and silent, as the engines carried them forward into the night, one truth became unavoidable. Some things follow not to chase, but to teach. Some mysteries accompany us, patiently, without expectation. And the sky silent, infinite, alive reminded them that the world was wider than any charted course could ever convey. Ahead, the darkness waited patiently, knowing that understanding would not come in a moment, but in attention stretched across time. Chapter 6. Voices on the radio. There is a strange comfort in hearing another human voice when the world around you feels unfamiliar. Even in ordinary times, a familiar tone can ground you. In moments like this, when the sky itself seems alive with intention, voices become lifelines, quiet threads connecting the known to the unknown. Captain Terauchi adjusted the radio microphone with practiced ease. His hands moved without hesitation, calm and steady, even as his mind raced quietly with questions. He spoke to Anchorage Air Traffic Control carefully, deliberately, each word measured. He described the lights, the warmth, the enormous shape that had emerged silently into the night. Tower, this is JAL 1628. We're observing two lights, then a larger object, moving with us, requesting radar confirmation and guidance. The controller's voice came back. Steady, professional, careful, but there was a subtle shift in tone, curiosity threaded through the comm protocol. 1628. We see blips intermittently on radar, though it's not consistent. Can you maintain visual contact? Yes, Terauchi replied, glancing at his co-pilot. And a flight engineer, we have continuous visual. The object is immense, matching our course and maneuvers. The words sounded normal technical, but inside, each syllable carried weight. It is one thing to experience something beyond explanation alone. It is another to try to communicate it to someone who cannot see it firsthand, who relies on instruments and protocol, who must filter reality through established rules. Yet even through the static of radio transmissions, a human connection emerged. The controller acknowledged without judgment, asked clarifying questions, and repeated instructions calmly. Each interaction reminded the crew that they were not isolated. They were not alone in the sky. There were other eyes, other minds witnessing the impossible in parallel. Have you ever had the sensation of being watched, and simultaneously of being held? That is what it felt like. The unknown presence outside, and the familiar human presence over the radio both existed in balance, creating a quiet tension, a sense of shared awareness that was neither threatening nor comforting, but profound. The co-pilot leaned toward the captain, whispering softly, "Do you think they understand what we're seeing?" Terauchi shook his head slightly, though his eyes never left the darkness ahead. "They will try. They always do, but words only go so far. Indeed, language falters when trying to describe things that stretch perception. How do you quantify scale when the sky refuses comparison? How do you explain intention when the only evidence is synchronized movement across hundreds of miles? How do you describe warmth on your face, emanating from an object that emits no heat according to instruments?" For several minutes, the aircraft continued southward. The object followed silently. Every minor maneuver the gentle dip of 4,000 feet. The slow 360-degree turn. Small course adjustments was mirrored effortlessly. It became increasingly clear that this was not an accidental alignment. Something deliberate was at work. A choice to accompany rather than chase. To observe rather than interfere. The radio conversations acted as a tether to reality. Controllers asked for bearings, distances, altitudes. They queried about instrument readings, visibility, and anomalies. Terauchi answered succinctly, avoiding speculation but noting what he could observe. The size, the shape, the pulsing glow. The brief radar blips corroborated some of his descriptions, but failed to capture the essence of what was unfolding. At one point, the controller hesitated, then said quietly, almost as if testing the limits of Protocol 1628, "Are you certain these readings are accurate?" Terauchi paused before answering. Accuracy. The word felt fragile. For instruments, accuracy is a matter of calibration. For humans, it is a matter of perception. He responded with, professionalism. Yes. As certain as I can be. Visual confirmation matches our instruments where possible. The object is large, structured, moving with us seamlessly. A silence followed radio silence, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of every hum, every click, every breath. The only sound in the cockpit was the low drone of the engines, steady and grounding. Outside, the sky remained vast, dark, and infinite. Yet the presence of human voices reminded the crew that they were part of a shared reality, even if part of that reality had yet to be understood. The flight engineer spoke softly, almost to himself. It's like it knows we're watching, but it's not reacting. Just moving with us. Yes, Terauchi agreed, not reacting, matching. Patient. Intentional. Have you ever experienced a moment so unusual that words fail, but silence communicates more clearly than any explanation ever could? That was happening in the cockpit. Words were insufficient, but the rhythm of questions and responses over the radio created a bridge between understanding and observation. The minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The object stayed nearby, immense and silent, following without aggression. The crew carried on with their duties, checking instruments, monitoring altitude, and maintaining steady hands, yet their minds remained acutely aware of the companion above and beyond the physical. Even routine tasks became infused with a sense of reverence. The co-pilot monitored navigation, adjusting minor headings, while the engineer cross-checked instruments. Each glance outside reminded them that something extraordinary was present, and each word over the radio tethered them to the human world, a world still governed by gravity, rules, and routine. The controllers occasionally offered guidance: adjust course, maintain altitude, report changes, but none could offer insight into what they were witnessing. That gap, the space between experience and explanation, heightened curiosity and wonder. What was this presence? What intelligence guided it? Was it aware of them, or were they merely moving along a path that had already been traced in space and time? Silence on the radio carried weight. The lack of immediate understanding was as profound as the object itself. And yet, the shared acknowledgement, the patient listening, offered reassurance. In a situation so alien, the mere presence of other humans, responding with care and attention, was grounding. Terauchi realized then that the encounter was not simply about observing the unknown. It was about communication on multiple levels. The object communicated through motion, patience, and presence. The radio communicated through measured words, careful questions, and attention. And within the cockpit, the crew communicated silently through glances, gestures, and shared understanding. Time passed, and miles continued to fall beneath them. Alaska's frozen rivers and snowfields stretched endlessly, indifferent to what occurred above. Yet the sky had become a theater of quiet mystery, with the crew at the center, and the controllers as distant witnesses to a phenomenon beyond standard comprehension. By the time the aircraft began to approach the southern reaches of their route, a subtle realization settled among them. The presence would not be captured in its entirety by instruments or reports. Only memory, observation, and careful description could carry its essence forward. And as the radio voices continued their careful, calm interaction, Captain Terauchi understood something quietly profound. Some encounters are less about answers and more about shared attention. They teach humility, patience, and observation without expectation. They remind humans that even amidst familiarity, the unknown can exist patiently alongside the known. The voices over the radio faded in and out, steady and reassuring, like distant lanterns. In the vast darkness, humanity speaking softly to the mystery above. Chapter 7. Patterns in the darkness. Night has a way of stretching reality. It softens edges, mutes certainty, and makes the familiar feel strange. For the crew of JAL 1628, this night was no different, but it had begun to unfold in ways that none of them could have anticipated. After hours of flight, after the glows and warmth had come and gone, the immense shape had withdrawn, leaving the skies seemingly empty. Yet the sense of being observed persisted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, a lingering impression that something large and intelligent had shared space with them. The co-pilot noticed it in the way the air seemed heavier, the way the darkness felt layered instead of flat. The flight engineer felt it in the quiet awareness that accompanied routine instrument checks, and Captain Terauchi, ever observant, felt it as a steady hum beneath his consciousness, the quiet echo of presence. Sometimes, when humans witness something beyond explanation, the mind begins searching instinctively for patterns. It is a survival mechanism as old as time. Our brains are wired to make sense of chaos. On T's night, patterns emerged, but not in ways anyone expected. The lights, the mothership, the warmth, the mirrored movements. Each element, at first isolated, began to connect into a silent choreography. The two small lights that had appeared earlier were not random, they had led them here. The enormous object was not erratic, had responded to every adjustment, every subtle movement of the aircraft, and the intermittent radar blips, faint as they were, matched these movements with eerie precision. The crew noticed these correspondences quietly, almost subconsciously. They did not speak about them, but each began to feel a rhythm to the events, a pattern that suggested intelligence rather than coincidence. "Captain," the co-pilot finally said, his voice hushed as if even words might disturb the order of the night. "Do you think it's aware of us?" Terauchi did not answer immediately. He focused on the stars outside, scanning for the faintest movement, the smallest shimmer. Awareness, intelligence, presence. Words fell short. Only observation remained. "I don't know," he said at last, "but it is responding, and that means something." The flight engineer chimed in, cautiously. "Everything it has done matches us, our altitude, our turns, even the pace of our flight. It's consistent." Yes, consistent. That was the word that resonated most. The pattern was deliberate, precise, intentional. It followed, yet did not chase. It accompanied, yet did not intrude. Each movement was mirrored with subtle grace. In moments like these, time behaves differently. Seconds stretch, become elastic, and blend with minutes. The routine hum of engines becomes a metronome, marking each beat of observation. The instruments remain steady, glowing green and reassuring. But outside the windows, the impossible is unfolding. Captain Terauchi began to sketch again, quietly, on a sheet of paper he had retrieved from the flight kit. Not detailed engineering drawings, but structured forms. The glowing lights, their pacing, the enormous object's outline. Each line helped him organize the chaos of perception into something tangible. For a pilot trained in precision, even this act of sketching was a tether to reality. The patterns revealed themselves further when the object's movement adjusted to the plane's subtle deviations. A twist here, a curve there. Each maneuver executed seamlessly, with zero delay, zero error. Nothing known to aviation could replicate this behavior without complex calculations and instantaneous response systems. Yet here it was alive in the night, effortless in its synchronization. The crew began to wonder, was this simply an advanced craft, a machine beyond human capabilities, or something else entirely? Something not mechanical, not bound by the rules they had been trained to trust. Something intelligent, aware, present. "Maybe it doesn't see us as a threat," the co-pilot said, quietly. almost to himself. Maybe it understands. The words hung in the cockpit. Understanding. Recognition. Communication without speech. In the soft glow of instruments and fading outside light, they felt the possibility. Perhaps this presence had been observing countless aircraft over time. Perhaps humans were only now noticing it. Perhaps it was teaching them something subtle. Patience, attention, humility. The patterns in the darkness continued to unfold. The pulsing of lights, the mirrored movements, the gentle warmth, all interconnected in a choreography that stretched across hundreds of miles and countless minutes. It was a reminder that patterns in the universe are not always mathematical. Some are intentional, some silent, and some simply exist to be observed. Captain Terauchi realized that his mind was changing. He was beginning to think differently about the sky, about flight, about the limits of perception. Experience had taught him to trust instruments, training, and physical law. Yet here, in the infinite darkness above Alaska, he saw evidence of something beyond all those anchors. And in seeing it, he was no longer the same. The flight engineer, quietly recording observations, noted in his mind the irregularities of radar blips and the consistency of visual tracking. Even imperfect instruments revealed a strange order. It was enough to confirm what their eyes already knew. This encounter was not a hallucination. It was structured, it was deliberate, and it had intention. The hours continued to pass, though they felt suspended. Patterns became a language, not spoken, but observed. And through it all, the crew maintained a professional calm that belied the profound experience unfolding around them. No panic, no reckless maneuvering, just observation, patience, and quiet acknowledgement of something extraordinary. And as Alaska slid silently beneath the aircraft, frozen rivers reflecting distant starlight, the crew understood. Patterns in the darkness are not always frightening. Sometimes they are gentle guides. Sometimes they are invitations to look closer, to pay attention, to recognize that even in vast, empty spaces, intelligence can be present, patient, deliberate, and unseen by most. The night whispered quietly, stretching endlessly above them, filled with patterns that only patience could reveal. Chapter 8. Evasive moves in silent shadows. The sky over Alaska had grown deeper now, the darkness stretching endlessly ahead of the aircraft. The frozen landscape below reflected little light, leaving the crew with only the stars and the mysterious presence that had shadowed their flight. There was a strange intimacy in the isolation. The world had narrowed to 3 people in a cockpit, an enormous unknown beyond the glass, and the quiet hum of the engines connecting them. Captain Terauchi checked the instruments one last time. Nothing indicated a mechanical failure. The altimeter, airspeed indicator, and navigational instruments all functioned normally. Yet outside, the enormity of the unseen companion was undeniable. It wasn't just a passing anomaly. It was following, maintaining pace, matching turns and descents with unnerving precision. The question arose, unspoken at first, then aloud. How close could they safely maneuver while still observing? Not to challenge it, not to provoke, but to understand. Terauchi decided to test the boundaries. He began a gentle descent, lowering the aircraft by another 1,000 feet. The wings tilted slightly as he initiated a slow, controlled turn. The 747 responding smoothly under his hands. Outside, the object adjusted with perfect timing, keeping the same relative position, the glow subtly reflecting against the cockpit glass. The co-pilot's eyes widened slightly, though his voice remained measured. It's keeping pace perfectly, even with the descent. Yes, Terauchi said quietly, like it knows exactly what we'll do next. The flight engineer added, it's as if it's alive in a way we can't define. There's intelligence here, but it's not human, not machine, something else entirely. That word intelligence settled in the cockpit like a quiet weight. It didn't frighten them, not in a sharp way, but in a deep contemplative sense. It demanded attention, focus, and curiosity. The descent continued, a test of coordination rather than a maneuver to evade. The object followed smoothly. Then came a 360-degree turn, a full circle that would normally confuse any object not designed for rapid adaptation. The mothership, or whatever form it had assumed in their eyes, responded seamlessly. No wobble, no lag, no hesitation. Patterns revealed themselves more clearly with each movement. The lights weren't random. The positioning wasn't chaotic. Each turn, each elevation change, each minor adjustment was mirrored with deliberate precision. They were dancing, but without rhythm imposed by music or human timing. The choreography existed purely between two parties to the aircraft, and the enormous presence beside it. "Do you think it's testing us?" the co-pilot asked. A whisper meant more for himself than anyone else. Terauchi considered the question carefully. Testing implies intention. Observation implies intelligence. Either possibility suggested an awareness far beyond what he could measure. "Perhaps," he replied softly. "Or perhaps it's only interacting in its own way. Not to challenge, not to chase, just moving with us." The warmth returned briefly as the plane tilted into another turn. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. A gentle reminder that proximity was more than visual. The cockpit seemed infused with presence, not threat. The glow bathed their faces faintly, reflecting off the windows and creating halos in the instrument's soft light. Minutes passed in near silence, broken only by occasional radio communication with Anchorage air traffic control. The controllers, informed of the ongoing maneuvers, offered standard guidance: maintain altitude. Report Chingy spot. Each transmission carried a faint tension, a subtle acknowledgement that this was no ordinary flight. Blips appeared intermittently on radar screens, confirming some of what the crew saw, but never capturing the full scale. The mystery remained. The flight engineer noted small ripples along the object's lights, undulating patterns that were inconsistent with any known aircraft behavior. They were not random. They had structure, coherence, purpose. It was subtle, almost poetic in motion, and suggested complexity beyond engineering. Schematics. Terauchi realized something quietly profound. Evasive maneuvers weren't about avoiding a threat. They were about learning limits, testing boundaries, understanding the interaction between the known and the unknown. He adjusted the aircraft again, a slight climb this time, and the object matched it precisely. Each movement reinforced the impossibility of what they were witnessing. For every action, a mirrored response. For every adjustment, a perfect alignment. No error, no delay, no compromise. The co-pilot leaned forward, voice low. "It's following without pressure. Like it's conscious of us, but not trying to harm us." "Yes," Terauchi said. "It's deliberate, patient, observing, and teaching, perhaps." The idea of being taught by something vast, silent, and unseen shifted the mood in the cockpit. Fear, curiosity, and awe merged into a calm attentiveness. Observation became the focus. Patience, the guiding principle. Understanding, the silent goal. Hours seemed to stretch into a quiet continuum. The frozen landscape below remained indifferent. Rivers and snowfields, unchanged by the encounter above. The crew maintained their composure, but inside, every sense was heightened. Every flicker of light, every subtle shift in air pressure, every minor reflection in the cockpit glass was magnified. Terauchi understood that night was teaching them something essential. That not all presence needs explanation, not all intelligence seeks interaction, and not all encounters require comprehension. Some mysteries exist to be witnessed, understood only partially, and remembered as lessons rather than solved puzzles. Eventually, the object began to slow its mirrored movements, the glow softening, fading gently into the surrounding darkness. The aircraft felt lighter somehow, though nothing had physically changed. The silent companion was withdrawing, leaving the sky intact, but not unchanged. The co-pilot exhaled slowly, a sound almost too soft to hear. "It's leaving." "Yes," Terauchi said, voice calm, almost reverent. "But not gone. Its presence will stay with us." The warmth disappeared. The glow vanished. The night returned to its familiar blackness, dotted with distant stars. Instruments glowed as usual. Engines hummed steadily, and the plane continued its path. Mechanically, nothing had changed. Emotionally, Everything had. Captain Terauchi reflected quietly. Sometimes the most profound lessons arrive not in answers, but in companionship. Sometimes silence teaches more than words, and sometimes the patterns in the darkness are guides, showing humans the vastness of the sky, the patience of the unknown, and the quiet intelligence that moves without sound or haste. The sky stretched endlessly ahead, vast and patient, waiting for those willing to observe without expectation. Chapter 9. Unseen Forces. Quiet Certainty. The night had deepened into a silence, so complete it felt like a presence itself. Inside the cockpit, the trio of the crew, Captain Terauchi, the co-pilot, and the flight engineer sat in quiet focus, their eyes tracing the endless darkness beyond the glass. The previous encounters had left them altered in subtle ways, hands steadier, hearts calmer, and minds stretched toward possibilities that the ordinary world rarely allowed. Yet, despite hours of observation, one truth remained undeniable: the object, or perhaps the intelligence behind it, was still near. Its pattern persisted. It was unseen in the way that radar occasionally glimpsed faint blips, yet felt palpable in the cockpit, in the warmth on their faces, in the gentle shifting of the glow against the instruments. It was a presence that did not announce itself loudly, did not roar or flash. It existed quietly, deliberately, with purpose beyond their comprehension. Have you ever felt a force so subtle it takes hours before you realize it has been influencing you all along? That was the feeling, now a slow, insistent pressure on perception, a call to notice details, to observe patterns, to consider possibilities beyond conventional thought. Captain Terauchi studied the instruments again, though the data offered only half the truth. The object seemed to exist slightly outside conventional tracking, a phantom in both radar and perception, a reminder that human understanding is bounded by our tools. Visual observation confirmed its size, structure, and movement, yet even these clues were partial. He understood then that knowledge in such moments is never complete. It is cumulative, tentative, and colored by attention. The flight engineer, meticulously noting each shift of light, each subtle undulation, whispered, almost reverently, "It's intelligent. There's no other way to explain the way it matches every maneuver." "Yes," Terauchi agreed softly. "It reacts, but not defensively. It follows, but not to intimidate. There's order here, but not chaos." Patterns had emerged, now threads, connecting the small lights that had appeared earlier. The enormous walnut-shaped presence, the warmth, and the mirrored movements. They were not random. They were deliberate. They were purposeful. Every little move of the aircraft was in sync, like the observer outside knew exactly what it would do next. The co-pilot asked quietly, "Do you think it's aware of our intentions?" Terauchi considered this. Awareness implies understanding, a recognition that goes beyond reaction. Could something so vast, so unfamiliar, grasp the subtleties of human thought, or at least anticipate our actions? The answer, he felt in his bones, was yes. Not in a human sense, but in a way that surpassed comprehension, beyond calculation, beyond instinct. The hours continued to stretch, yet nothing about the encounter induced panic. Instead, there was calm certainty, a quiet trust that the unknown presence, enormous and unseen, was not there to harm them. It accompanied, observed, and moved with patience. The feeling was subtle, yet profound. The difference between fear and respect had never felt so clear. Captain Terauchi adjusted course slightly, testing once again. The object's movement mirrored the plane without delay, maintaining alignment through gentle dips and subtle banking. No human or mechanical pilot could match this precision without extraordinary calculation. And yet, here it was, effortlessly, flawlessly. Have you ever watched someone or something move with such certainty that you realized you were merely a participant in its rhythm rather than its equal? That was the sensation now. A dance without music, a choreography in silence, a conversation without words. Our radio communication continued, intermittently with Anchorage ATC. The controllers maintained calm, asking measured questions about location, sighs, and radar returns. Yet the crew noticed a subtle shift in tone, a quiet acknowledgement that this was beyond standard aviation experience. The brief blips on radar, while confirming some aspects of the sighting, could not capture the magnitude, nor the pattern, nor the presence of something deliberate in the night sky. The flight engineer observed the soft ripple along the object's lights, noting their undulations and subtle pulsing. He whispered, "It's communicating. In its own way, these patterns, they mean something." Terauchi nodded. Though he did not speak aloud, understanding did not require words. Observation, patience, and attention were the currency of comprehension in this moment. The human mind, he realized, often rushes toward explanation. But here, understanding arrived quietly, through noticing and enduring. The vast Alaskan landscape continued beneath them, frozen and indifferent, yet somehow illuminated by the presence above. The dark rivers, snowfields, and endless stretches of tundra became a backdrop for an encounter that challenged the very limits of perception. The pattern, the purpose, and the deliberate calm of the object suggested intelligence. That did not need to announce itself. It required only awareness. The crew understood something essential. The presence did not seek to dominate or intimidate. It did not flash lights or create alarm. It moved, mirrored, and observed the patient, deliberate, and entirely beyond expectation. It was teaching something, though the lesson was subtle. Attention, patience, humility. Time, meanwhile, became a pliable concept. Minutes stretched and folded upon themselves. The boundaries of reality felt soft, as though the sky itself had expanded to accommodate understanding. Every movement, every pulse of light, every mirrored response created a rhythm that resonated quietly within the cockpit. Captain Terauchi reflected that some forces in the universe do not operate according to the rules of threat or defense. Some forces exist to remind observers that comprehension is limited. That observation is an active and patient process, and that presence can teach without action, can communicate without speech. And in that quiet certainty, the crew's fear gave way to a profound respect. They were witnessing something far larger than themselves, moving beyond explanation, yet doing so with the gentleness of an unseen guide. As Alaska's frozen expanse slid beneath them, the aircraft continued southward, engines humming steadily, instruments glowing calmly. Outside, the darkness waited silent, patient, vast, and full of lessons yet to reveal. Sometimes, understanding comes not through knowledge, but through quiet attention, watching unseen forces move with deliberate certainty. Chapter 10. The Pulse of the Unknown. The night, air around the Boeing 747, seemed thicker now, not in the physical sense, but in the feeling it carried. There was a rhythm to the darkness, a subtle cadence that the crew could sense without seeing it. It was as though the vast Alaskan sky itself had learned to breathe in time with the presence. They had followed for hours, and in that rhythm, the pulse of the unknown revealed itself not as a threat, not as a challenge, but as a quiet, deliberate heartbeat, stretching across the vast empty space. Captain Terauchi kept his hands steady on the controls, but his mind drifted into the same rhythm. Every flicker of light outside, every undulation in the faint glow, every gentle shift in proximity resonated like a beat in a song. Only he could feel there was a synchrony here, a connection between aircraft and observer. Subtle and patient, that didn't require explanation to exist. The co-pilot, leaning slightly forward, whispered, "It's like it's alive. Not alive like us, but alive." His voice carried a mix of awe and tentative understanding. "Yes," Terauchi replied softly, eyes scanning the inky black outside. "It moves with awareness. Every response is measured, every shift intentional, but it doesn't act in hostility. It only exists with us." The flight engineer, notebook open, though he scarcely wrote any more, observed silently. He could track the faint radar returns and cross-check them against the visual observations. But something remained beyond technical analysis. The pulsing lights, the immense form in the darkness, the synchronized, Movements they transcended the realm of machinery. Have you ever noticed that some things cannot be captured in diagrams or numbers, that some truths exist only in perception and patience? That was their reality now, a phenomenon that could be described, approximated, sketched, but never fully contained. Terauchi considered the warmth again. It had returned, subtle but distinct, brushing the cockpit like a faint memory, not heat in the traditional sense, not danger, not warning, but an indication of closeness, a gentle pulse, almost alive, confirming presence without imposing. Patterns emerged, not random but structured. The small lights that had approached earlier seemed to have led them into this space, perhaps forming a path or a signal. The enormous walnut-shaped object mirrored their maneuvers, maintaining the same rhythm and distance. It didn't accelerate aggressively, didn't force them into action. It moved with a calm deliberation that was unsettling in its perfection. The co-pilot murmured, "Do you think it understands us? Our intent?" Terauchi didn't answer, immediately to ask the question. Aloud was almost an admission of humility. Could something so vast, so different, interpret human intention? Could a presence, entirely alien, comprehend the minutiae of pilot maneuvers, the unconscious thoughts guiding each adjustment? "I don't know," Terauchi said finally, voice quiet but firm. "But it moves in a way that suggests awareness. It anticipates, yet does not manipulate. It follows, but does not pursue." The crew settled into a silent observation, each of them aware that every movement of the aircraft was part of a delicate dance. The object outside seemed to respond to human action without coercion. Its pulsing glow, an immense, form a reminder of order in a sky that was otherwise chaotic and infinite. The radar blips continued to appear and vanish. Anchorage Air Traffic Control maintained their careful radio communications, asking questions, providing instructions, and logging the intermittent readings. To them, it might have seemed sporadic or inconclusive. To the crew, it was confirmation of something far greater. Their observations were real, verifiable, yet still profoundly mysterious. Patterns persisted in other subtle ways as well. The pulsing of lights matched the timing of minor aircraft adjustments. The glow, faint but consistent, would shift to maintain visibility through the darkness, highlighting curves, bulges, and edges of the object that suggested structure rather than randomness. The warmth on their faces followed a rhythm that was neither constant nor absent, but deliberate, a soft indicator of proximity. "Do you think it's trying to communicate?" the co-pilot whispered. Terauchi considered. Communication doesn't require words. Presence can speak louder than sound. Movement can convey intention. Warmth can indicate attention. By this measure, the answer was yes. The presence was communicating, patiently, subtly, without the need for instruments or voice. Hours passed in a gentle, almost hypnotic flow. The Alaskan tundra below remained untouched by the extraordinary events above. Snowfields glimmered under distant starlight. Frozen rivers stretched silently into the horizon, and the air, though cold and thin, carried a weight that only awareness could feel. The crew's senses sharpened. Eyes scanned constantly, though not obsessively. Hands rested on controls, though attention was distributed between instruments and observation. Minds stayed alert, curious, and quietly respectful of the immense intelligence moving alongside them. Terauchi reflected on human perception. We often measure reality by what we can control, what we can predict, what we can explain. Yet here, control was impossible. Prediction was futile. Explanation was incomplete. The sky had reminded him that not all phenomena exist for human understanding. They exist for observation, awareness, and sometimes transformation of perspective. The pulsing glow of the object began to shift subtly, a rhythmic, fading and brightening that felt like the heartbeat of the unknown. Each pulse resonated with the quiet timing of the cockpit, aligning with the aircraft's movements, as though responding to invisible cues. It was a lesson in patience, observation, and harmony. The flight engineer murmured, "It doesn't need to chase. It doesn't need to display power. Its presence is enough." Yes, Terauchi said softly. Presence is more powerful than pursuit. Observation is more revealing than explanation. Patience is more enlightening than reaction. And in the darkness, with Alaska passing below, and the immense unknown accompanying them above, the crew understood something quietly profound. The universe contains intelligence and awareness that transcends human understanding, yet its lessons are always accessible to those willing to observe carefully, without haste, without fear, and without expectation. The pulse of the unknown continued silently, reminding them that some truths revealed themselves only to patience, only to careful attention, only to those willing to notice without trying to control. Chapter 11. Shadows of Belief. The hours of flight had carried the crew into a strange, liminal space. A realm that felt suspended between reality and possibility, between the measured certainty of instruments and the profound uncertainty of perception. The object or presence had moved alongside them for so long that it had become almost a companion, silent, deliberate, and impossibly vast. And yet, with its calm persistence, it had begun to shift something. Inside each of them, a sense of belief, fragile but undeniable, forming quietly in the spaces between thought and observation. Captain Terauchi leaned back slightly, hands resting on the controls, eyes scanning the darkness outside. The stars seemed to pulse faintly, reflected through the immense presence they had followed for hours. Could the universe hold something entirely unknown, yet intelligible in its own way? Could a human mind, trained in logic, mathematics, and aviation, truly comprehend something so alien, yet so structured? These questions were unspoken but heavy. The co-pilot, still leaning forward, broke the silence. I don't know if I can explain what I'm seeing. It feels deliberate, intentional, but it's not trying to harm us. How do we process that? Terauchi gave a quiet nod. Processing is not the goal. Witnessing is understanding. Comes slowly, not all at once. The flight engineer added softly, I think that's the point. It's showing us something, but on its own terms. It's teaching, not commanding. And indeed, teaching seemed to be the central theme of the night. Every maneuver they had executed, the gentle dips, the 360-degree turn, the subtle adjustments in speed and course had been mirrored without error. Every pulse of light, every shift of glow, every faint warmth had followed a rhythm. It was not random. It was structured, purposeful. A silent language had emerged, communicated not with sound or words, but with presence and pattern. Have you ever noticed how witnessing something inexplicable can slowly shift your beliefs? How prolonged attention and reflection can make the impossible feel real without needing immediate explanation? That was happening now, quietly and irreversibly. Terauchi thought back to his earlier experience as a fighter pilot. Speed, control, reaction, all measurable, all trainable. But this was beyond training, beyond instruments, beyond even human expectation. And yet, the principles of observation applied. Patience, attention, awareness. The unknown could be approached not with fear, but with careful, quiet respect. The co-pilot, his voice barely above a whisper, said, Do you think people will believe us? The question hung in the cockpit, suspended like the stars outside. Terauchi didn't answer immediately, because the thought carried weight far beyond the flight itself. Belief is a fragile thing, particularly when it clashes with conventional understanding. Yet what they had witnessed was undeniable in their minds, regardless of external skepticism. Belief isn't the point, he said finally. Understanding begins with seeing. Explaining comes later. Witnessing is the first step. The flight engineer nodded, silently recording mental notes, aware that no document could fully capture the depth of what they were experiencing. Instruments measured speed and altitude, radar intermittently reflected the massive presence outside, but the essence, the rhythm, the pulse, the mirrored movement remained beyond technical capture. Patterns continued to emerge, subtle but undeniable. The two small lights that had approached earlier seemed to form a prelude to the appearance of the larger object. The walnut-shaped form mirrored every maneuver, with a grace and precision impossible for any human technology. The glow and faint warmth communicated presence and attention without aggression. It was in the quiet repetition of observation that belief began to solidify. Each pattern was a thread connecting perception to reality, creating a tapestry of experience that could not be dismissed. The more they observed, the more the impossible became possible, the more the unknown felt tangible, almost intimate. Terauchi realized something essential. Belief does not always require evidence in the conventional sense. Sometimes it is forged through repeated experience, through attention sustained over hours, through the recognition of patterns that defy explanation but carry meaning. The crew's minds, previously grounded in strict rationality, had shifted. They were no longer simply pilots following a flight path. They were witnesses, participants in a dialogue with something profoundly intelligent, patient, and vast. Every movement of the aircraft, every response of the presence outside, every subtle glow became a message, a reminder that the universe is larger, stranger, and more ordered than ordinary perception allows. Have you ever felt a shift inside? Small, but undeniable, when reality bends just slightly, and you realize there is more to see than what was visible before. That was happening in that cockpit, a quiet awakening, a gentle opening of the mind to possibilities beyond textbooks, regulations, or radar blips. Radio communications with Anchorage ATC continued. Brief and procedural, the controllers asked questions, offered guidance, and recorded what they could detect. Intermittent radar blips confirmed partial presence, but instruments could never fully encompass what the human eye could witness over hours of careful observation. In a sense, the crew had become the instruments their senses calibrated by experience, patience, and attention. And yet, even amidst this profound awareness, fear had not taken hold. There was respect, yes, curiosity. Certainly, but also calm the unknown had arrived, not as a predator but as a patient companion, moving in deliberate patterns, teaching through presence, revealing without intrusion. The pulsing glow persisted, subtle but rhythmic, echoing faintly through the cockpit like a heartbeat in the darkness. It was not urgent. It did not command attention. It simply existed alongside, accompanying, teaching, and inviting observation. Terauchi understood that this was the essence of the night. The unknown does not always demand confrontation. Sometimes it invites reflection. Sometimes it encourages patience. Sometimes it reshapes belief by showing presence, pattern, and intelligence without requiring immediate understanding. As Alaska stretched below in silent, frozen expanses, the crew embraced the quiet realization that belief had shifted gently but irrevocably. They had witnessed something impossible, yet consistent. Something intelligent, yet subtle. Something vast, yet intimately present. And in that silent space, a quiet truth emerged. The universe holds mysteries that can change us, not through spectacle, but through careful attention, through observation, through witnessing patterns in the darkness and recognizing intelligence where none was expected. The shadows of belief settled softly, wrapping around the cockpit like a gentle reminder that seeing is the first step toward understanding. Chapter 12. The Edge of Understanding. The hours had folded into one another, like the gentle undulations of the northern lights, stretching time and space into a quiet continuum. For Captain Terauchi, the co-pilot, and the flight engineer, the flight had transformed into more than just a journey from Paris to Tokyo. It had become a journey into the edges of human perception, where knowledge meets mystery and understanding flirts with the impossible. The object, immense and silent, had maintained its presence beside the aircraft for hours. Its glow was softer now, almost tentative, pulsing with a rhythm that felt like deliberate attention. The crew had come to recognize it not just as a phenomenon to be observed, but as an active participant in their experience of quiet, patient intelligence that responded without coercion. Captain Terauchi adjusted his focus, scanning the cockpit instruments while glancing outside. The flight engineer's eyes mirrored his, capturing every subtle shift in the faint illumination, every ripple along the object's form. And the co-pilot, leaning slightly forward, spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. It's like it's guiding us without words, without commands, without pressure. Yes, Terauchi agreed softly. It's teaching through presence, demonstrating through patterns. We only have to pay attention. And pay attention they did. Every dip, every climb, every subtle turn of the 747 was mirrored. With uncanny precision, the pattern was consistent, deliberate, and intelligent. The two smaller lights that had appeared earlier were no longer simply incidental. They seemed to have led the aircraft to this moment, introducing the larger presence that now hovered alongside them like a silent companion. Time, as measured by the clock or altimeter, had become secondary. What mattered was observation, noticing the pulse of light, the rhythm of movement, the faint warmth that suggested proximity without threat. It was a lesson in attention, in perceiving without needing to immediately understand, in trusting that observation itself is a bridge to insight. The flight engineer broke the silence again, his voice low, almost reverent. Every movement, every pulse, it's consistent. There's intention behind it, but it's subtle, not aggressive, not threatening, just there. Yes, Terauchi said, keeping his voice calm, steady, but filled with quiet awe. It's intelligence, beyond what we measure, yet entirely deliberate. It doesn't demand compliance. It doesn't chase, it follows. And through that following, it communicates. Patterns had become their language. Not words, not instruments, not diagrams, patterns. The pulsing light, the mirrored maneuvers, the warmth on their faces. All connected, all conveying a rhythm, a structure, a quiet intelligence. And as they observed, the crew felt themselves gradually understanding not in a complete, explainable way, but in a deep, intuitive sense. Have you ever been so attentive to something unknown that it begins to feel almost familiar? That the strange becomes intimate through careful observation. That was the sensation in the cockpit. The impossible had become a companion. The unknown had become a teacher, and the mysterious had revealed itself. Not fully, but in essential glimpses. Radio transmissions with Anchorage ATC remained calm and professional. Controllers asked for bearings, logged intermittent radar returns, and offered standard guidance. Yet the crew sensed something unspacking a recognition that what they were witnessing defied conventional explanation. The intermittent radar blips were just hints, insufficient to capture the magnitude, structure, or intelligence of the presence accompanying them. Only sustained observation, patience, and quiet attention could reveal the depth of the encounter. The co-pilot finally asked the question that had hovered in their minds for hours. Do you think it wants us to understand? Terauchi considered. Understanding, in human terms, is often linear, codified, measurable. Yet here, understanding felt circular, expansive, and patient. Perhaps it wasn't about comprehension in the conventional sense. Perhaps the lesson was simply to observe, to notice, to exist alongside something larger and stranger without fear or judgment. Yes, he said quietly. It doesn't force comprehension. It invites attention. It demonstrates that intelligence can exist beyond our frameworks, yet still be comprehensible through observation. We are learning simply by watching, by paying attention. The pulsing glow shifted again, now brighter, then softer, in a rhythm that seemed to echo the crew's own breathing. It was not mechanical. It was not artificial in a way they could define. It was alive not in the sense of humans or animals, but alive in awareness, in intelligence, in subtle communication. The flight engineer leaned slightly closer, whispering, "It's like it knows how we perceive it, and it's adjusting, teaching through rhythm and presence." "Yes," Terauchi replied, feeling the truth of the statement. It's teaching without speaking, communicating without sound, guiding without interference. That is its language. Observation, patience, and awareness are the only ways to understand. Below them, Alaska stretched endlessly, frozen and silent. indifferent yet illuminated by the presence in the sky. Mountains rose and fell, rivers glimmered faintly, and snowfields reflected distant starlight, but none of it seemed significant compared to the quiet, deliberate intelligence moving alongside them. Hours of observation had taught them subtle truths, that the universe contains forces that do not conform to human understanding, that intelligence may exist in forms entirely alien yet capable of subtle communication, that the act of witnessing can itself create understanding. Patterns, rhythms, and presence had become their guideposts. Each moment of observation revealed more alignment, more intent, more awareness. The two smaller lights that had first appeared seemed now like heralds, leading the aircraft into an encounter with something immense and deliberate, and the walnut-shaped form, immense and silent, mirrored them with patience and grace that defied human technology and human comprehension. Terauchi finally leaned back, releasing a quiet sigh. We've come to the edge of understanding tonight. Not complete understanding, but close enough to see there's more, much more. And that's enough for now. The co-pilot nodded slowly, the flight engineer remaining silent, but deeply contemplative. All three had shifted in subtle ways, not just as pilots, but as witnesses, observers, and participants in something extraordinary. At the edge of understanding, the unknown ceases to terrify and begins to teach, quietly, patiently, and profoundly. Chapter 13. Return to the familiar. Forever changed. The first hints of dawn began to touch the horizon, a faint wash of pale light against the endless Alaskan night. Inside the cockpit, T-crew of Hull 1628 sat in quiet reflection. Hours had passed, or maybe it had felt like minutes stretched into infinity. The night had been extraordinary, surreal, and entirely beyond explanation, yet it had been witnessed, documented, and felt in every fiber of their being. Captain Terauchi's hands rested lightly on the controls. The airplane hummed steadily beneath him, obedient and familiar, a machine of human engineering in a sky, now returning to normalcy. And yet, despite this return to routine, nothing would feel normal again. The sky had opened a door to something vast, deliberate, and alive, something that could not be measured entirely by instruments, yet whose presence had been undeniable. The co-pilot, leaning forward, with a mix of awe and quiet relief, spoke softly. "It's gone." Terauchi shook his head slowly. "Not gone. Not gone. It's always there. We just were lucky enough to see it, to experience it up close." The flight engineer adjusted the instruments, glancing outside at the faint glow of early morning, reflecting off distant snowfields. He nodded in agreement. "It's as if it taught us something without saying a word. And that lesson stays with us. Have you ever experienced a moment so profound that you knew life would never feel quite the same afterward? That even as routine resumes, the world seems richer, more layered, more aware. That was their reality now. The flight would continue, their destination still hours away. But the journey had already shifted the very way they perceived the universe. Patterns, rhythms, and subtle communications had revealed themselves in the night sky. The two smaller lights that had appeared earlier had led them the enormous walnut-shaped. Presence had mirrored them perfectly, and the intermittent warmth and pulsing glow had conveyed attention, intelligence, and intent. All of it had taught the crew something fundamental. Presence and observation can communicate as profoundly as words, and the universe may hold intelligence in forms we cannot yet fully grasp. Captain Terauchi reflected quietly on the lesson. All his years as a pilot had trained him to trust instruments, rules, and protocols. All his experience as a fighter pilot had taught him precision, strategy, and reaction, but nothing had prepared him for this phenomena beyond reckoning. Defying physics as humans knew it, yet interacting with patience and awareness, the co-pilot finally broke the silence again. "Do you think anyone will believe us?" Terauchi smiled faintly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps belief doesn't matter. What matters is that we witnessed, that we observed, and that we learned something fundamental about patience, attention, and the universe itself." The flight engineer added quietly, "And we'll never forget it. Even if instruments or reports cannot fully capture it, we will remember. And that memory becomes knowledge in its own way. The plane continued its southward path, leaving the frozen expanse of Yukon Flats behind. Mountains gave way to rolling hills, snowfields to rivers glinting in the early sun. Everything was returning to familiarity, the rhythm of engines, the predictable patterns of instruments, the routine of navigation. And yet, the ordinary world now felt layered with hidden depth. The sky itself seemed transformed. The crew knew that, out there, beyond radar, beyond immediate observation, intelligence could exist, quietly, deliberately, and patiently. That the universe was far more vast, more structured, and more mysterious than ordinary human perception allowed, and that their own awareness, their patience, attention, and willingness to observe had been the bridge to that knowledge. Captain Terauchi finally allowed himself a quiet exhale, a subtle release of tension accumulated over hours of intense observation. "We've returned to the familiar," he said softly, "but we're forever changed. Not by fear, not by spectacle, but by presence, by intelligence in motion, patiently observed." The co-pilot nodded, the quiet understanding mirrored in his eyes. "The sky, it's never been the same, has it?" "No," Terauchi replied. "It isn't, and neither are we." The flight engineer recorded a few final notes, not merely of altitude or radar blips, but of perception itself, the warmth, the glow, the rhythm of movement, the mirrored maneuvers, the subtle intelligence that had been with them all night long. The report would be written, documents would be filed, investigations would unfold, but they knew the true understanding existed quietly in memory, in observation, and in patient reflection. As Alaska receded behind them, the vast, infinite skies stretched ahead, a canvas, both familiar and profoundly mysterious. The crew had been witnesses to something extraordinary. They had touched the edge of human understanding and glimpsed intelligence that moved beyond instruments, words, or expectation. And they had learned that sometimes the deepest lessons are conveyed not through explanation, but through presence. Have you ever noticed that some experiences stay with you long after they end? That the memory of them reshapes how you see the world, how you listen, and how you understand even ordinary moments? That was the gift of this night. Subtle, patient, and enduring. And so, as the sun rose gently over the horizon, painting the sky with soft hues of pink and gold, the aircraft continued toward Tokyo. The engines hummed their familiar tune. The instruments glowed steadily, and the world appeared as it always had. Yet for Captain Terauchi, the co-pilot, and the flight engineer, everything had changed. They had witnessed presence in the unknown. They had observed intelligence in silence, and they carried with them a quiet certainty. The universe is vaster, stranger, and more wondrous than they had ever imagined. The sky stretched endlessly ahead, and though their journey would continue, the memory of that night and the lessons whispered by the unseen would follow them forever. Whispered lessons of the sky. And so, the story of JAL 1628 drifts softly into memory, like a quiet star fading into the dawn. Hours of observation, moments of wonder, and the silent presence that accompanied the crew through the Alaskan night had left their mark not only on instruments and reports, but on the hearts and minds of those who witnessed it. What makes this encounter remarkable isn't just the glowing lights, the enormous walnut-shaped craft, or the mirrored movements impossible to explain. It's the subtle, patient communication hidden in every pulse, every shift, every pattern. It's the quiet lesson that some intelligence moves in ways humans cannot immediately measure, yet we can perceive through attention, patience, and presence. Captain Terauchi, the co-pilot, and the flight engineer returned to routine life, yet the experience stayed with them, whispering a truth they could not unhear. The universe is vast, mysterious, and alive in ways that quietly challenge our understanding. The lessons of that night are not meant to terrify, but to awaken curiosity, to remind us that reality extends beyond instruments and charts, beyond expectations and skepticism, into realms that reward careful observation and open minds. For those who hear this story, perhaps you will feel it too, the pulse of the unknown, the rhythm of intelligence beyond our comprehension, the gentle guidance of presence. Perhaps you'll notice the subtle patterns in your own life, in the skies above, or in moments of quiet reflection. And as we close this chapter of the night, remember the unknown is not always distant, nor always threatening. Sometimes it is patient, sometimes it is gentle, and sometimes it is simply waiting for us to observe, to wonder, and to learn. The sky stretches endlessly above, full of mysteries, full of whispers, and full of possibilities, inviting those who dare to look, to see, and to dream.